So John Williams is one of the most celebrated composers in the history of cinema, racking up an extensive list of award nominations, along with several wins for his original compositions, starting out with Jaws in 1975, but so much pushed the envelope further and just revolutionized so much film composing with his award win for the Oscars, Saturn Awards, Golden Globes, and the BAFTAs for Star Wars in 1977. Now, Williams would actually gain a BAFTA award for his work on The Empire Strikes Back, which only garnered nominations at all the other awards bodies, but it actually gave him a Grammy for the original double LP releases for Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. And Return of the Jedi would come on much later down the line in the 80s when the vinyl thing was getting a little bit off on the track and whatnot. It wasn't as popular since the rise of CDs and all type of stuff, so it only got a single LP release and didn't get any Grammy awards or whatnot for it, so it came off a little later on down the line and didn't quite go off it, but those original LP releases seem to be the thing that keeps getting a lot of attention, keeps getting circled back around to, where the original LPs for Empire and the original Star Wars were actual remixes. They weren't faithful to the original film mixes. They had John Neal, another mixer, come in and kind of redo them for the vinyl format and type of stuff and whatnot. Has a lot of differences, a lot of things weren't quite as sonically great or whatnot. They did end up putting them out on CD, but they got a little boost up in the audio quality in that regard. But still, there's still a lot more things to kind of work on because they weren't complete. And there's a lot of other stuff you can include on another release and stuff like that. And the big soundtrack release we're talking about here is the 1993 Star Wars Trilogy original soundtrack Anthology, because it's kind of the one that gets missed out in a lot of the discussions, but it seems to be the one that a lot of the audio files, a lot of people kind of look at all these different releases, compare them back and forth, the sonic qualities, all the different things. Seems to be one that a lot of people tend to go back and prefer for a lot of different reasons here, because, like I said, the double LPs and the original Jedi single LP didn't come off the best ways possible because, again, Jedi has very little music on it in that regard, and even though they did kind of use more of the film mixes for the Jedi one because they didn't do as much extensive work for it because, again, vinyl wasn't as big of a thing as it eventually would come back around to about 25 years later. There just been a very big concerted effort at the time on the part of a lot of different people, including the producer of the entire thing, Nick Redman, who had been a 20th Century Fox soundtrack archivist and consultant. He became an Oscar-nominated documentarian, also co-founder of Twilight Time, the entire Blu-ray boutique company. Sadly passed away in 2019 at the age of 63. But he really spearheaded this thing so much to make it as much of an involved release, so much of a faithful thing back to the original Eric Tomlinson film mixes that were done back in the day, but they had to source things from a lot of different places, and they kind of grabbed things from different countries and stuff like that, and also Polygram really wasn't being very forthcoming in providing their album masters to kind of fill in the blanks at some places where they didn't have other sources for it. So it's a very involved and complicated way of how they went around to get this entire soundtrack put together on a 4 CD set, where they had dedicated CDs for Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, with only about 75 minutes of music per CD, and then kind of compiled some alternate mixes and some additional stuff on the 4th disc, and some other source music, like some of the stuff from Cantina and Laughing Neck from Jabba's Palace, stuff like that. So they tried to make it more expansive, but they still missed a few pieces that were on the previous Polygram releases, but obviously added a whole lot more on top of that kind of fill it out to a certain degree. But it's such a really good looking release. You have that wonderful Tom Jung Star Wars artwork all over the whole thing. Absolutely love the whole look of this long box format, the whole thing, which was a big thing back in the 90s. Really love their long boxes, but the thing fits in so well. Beautiful 64-page full color booklet. Wonderful behind the scenes stills of the film stuff from seeing John Williams in the whole thing. You get a lot of Ralph McQuarrie artwork, which just absolutely looks stunning. I love the art of Star Wars books and all that type of stuff. They look absolutely stunning type of things. You also had a lot of liner notes from Lucas Kendall, who wrote up kind of track by track things. Kind of would hope more that it kind of going more to like technical details and more into like the music theory or something else behind that, but it's a bit more kind of like, what's the action, the film happening as this skew is going on. Most of that's there, except when he kind of has the note when there's some alternate tracks put in here, or some other things are kind of here and there, whatnot, where they kind of corrected some things here and there from previous releases or something like that. So it's not quite as interesting on that level, but it's still kind of a thing if you want to kind of like pinpoint exactly what's going on here and there. But usually the track titles are at least enough of a thing. Of course, if you've seen the films enough times, the tracks just click in your head with the visuals, no problem, whatnot. But kind of the interesting thing is, like, I opened the thing and I saw this name on one of the essays that put in the whole thing was Nicholas Meyer, the writer and director who gave us Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, co-wrote Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, also co-writer and director of Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Countries. Like, you got the wrong franchise, but I'll take something from Nick Meyer. He's talking a whole bunch of stuff about Wagnerian film music, composing, and all these other things, like deep into film history and how Williams moves all that stuff and threads it all back into his story and all the type of stuff he does for the entire film. Very extensive, very educated read on that regard. And also another one from a nationally syndicated film critic named John Burlingham, and all these interesting little things. Just like, it's a really nice booklet. I picked it up online from a Goodwill shop a couple of years ago, and it's like, should have picked this up a long time ago, because one, it looks wonderful, but also, again, there's a lot of things to love about the actual sound quality of this whole thing, and where they source a lot of things from. Like I said, they kind of had a, from what way you would put it, sounds a little bit more Frankenstein's monster in a certain way, but they did such a great job of mastering this whole thing to make it sound pretty much seamless and how this all stuff goes together. Like I said, they did try to source things directly from the Polygram album masters, which they would not provide, so they kind of pulled things directly from the Polygram CDs, where they had to. They kind of filled in the blanks of some tracks they didn't have source tape masters from. But going off to the original Star Wars, which would end up knowing as A New Hope later on, when they got these 2-track tapes or whatnot, which were kind of said to be like 5th generation or later from the original recordings, but they still wanted to have access to all the original takes. They could remix and re-edit the whole thing back to the original film mixes. Really kind of realized there was a lot wider spectral, sort of like stereo spread to the whole thing, a lot more frequency response, but apparently, according to a lot of things, which a lot of this information comes from Malone Digital. Chris Malone did an amazing job going through as an audio engineer himself, detailing, analyzing, breaking down all this type of stuff. The entire thing kind of had a little bit of a restriction on the dynamic range to a certain degree, just in terms of like how it was transferred from the analog format into the digital realm there, but nothing was really kind of tampered with so much when they actually started working on the whole thing. There was no noise reduction, there was no dynamic range processing, no real major equalization going on. They really kind of made them as much of an organically sounding experience as possible, which definitely comes out so much when you're listening to this whole thing. Now, there's an interesting little quirk here in terms of like the main title, the thing that opens the film with the text crawl and the Star Destroyer and stuff like that, actually segues into like the end title march to a certain degree, because I think that's the way it was on the original double LP release, where they kind of said they wanted to make the entire thing chronological towards how all the tracks lay out in the film, but they didn't really replicate that. I don't know what the reason was behind why they had that edict, but they end up not doing that to a certain degree. So if you really want to have much more of a preserved way of how it presents in the film, where it goes Star Destroyer and the Blockade Runner and all the Stormtroopers burst out in the entire thing, it's much more well preserved on the 1997 editions, but I'll end up getting to those in due time in the video here. But when you go over to The Empire Strikes Back, there's a lot more hard work involved in this whole thing, because they almost couldn't even find the master tapes or whatnot, any source tapes whatsoever for it, until almost the end of the project, where they only had about 1 week per disc to actually put the entire thing together. So a little bit on the crunch, doing things to a certain degree, and it's almost want to scrap the entire project that they didn't find these 1/4-inch 4-track tapes to a certain degree, but they were deteriorating. Like when they were transferring like the residue off the tapes and stuff like that, stuff was flaking off, and they're having to do very, very delicate types of things to make sure that they stayed intact as they're transferring, because it's only going to take so many times through these entire reel-to-reels and all that type of stuff. It ain't going to last very long. So that was 1993. Imagine what condition they are in today, if they're in any condition whatsoever now. But as I said, they kind of had to source things from a couple different places here, where they kind of like had to patchwork the whole thing together, but it still sounds very well because they mastered it very, very well. And they didn't, like I said, do a lot of futzing and whatnot. They didn't go in there trying to EQ the thing to death or anything else like that. They wanted to make a very very natural sounding preservation for everything they had here to make sure it sounded very much on the most pleasing end they possibly could. But because of that, there's certain tracks like the Imperial March, which is a fantastic new composition for the entire film, and the one called Battle in the Snow, which kind of sparks off the entire Hoth battle, don't have the very best of dynamic range, but they still do a very good job to integrate those pretty damn well in the entire thing. But they did actually correct some things where they're like, on the polygram ones, there are certain tracks that kind of like cut together that really didn't belong together in the entire film. They kind of separate those things out, despite my thing that I said about the main title in the first film. They kind of decided to try to separate things as much as possible and kind of present them as they were in the film as individual tracks. But they did have some swapped stereo channels on like Leia's instructions, that track, and also the departure of Boba Fett. Those little things that got a little bit not perfect in certain places that, of course, producers, a lot of people involved in the whole thing, did kind of note later on when they went off and tried to do a much more of a comprehensive thing for the 97 releases. But Empire still comes off very, very well. Everything that goes on in that entire CD does come off very nicely. Just like, it's one of my favorite scores. If I wanted to pick one, that's the one I just go back to, because all the different things, Yoda's theme, beautiful types of things, all the kind of sweeping romanticism you have working between Han and Leia in the entire film, that musical motif always coming back around the whole thing. Of course, again, like I said, Imperial March is a master stroke of the entire thing, just brings so much might to the entire Empire in the film, and just everything, just a brilliant score. All of them are kind of brilliant to their degrees, but Empire's the one just like has the most things. Of course, all the stuff going on in Cloud City, beautiful types of interesting, just lush things going on, just introduces and breaks open the world of Star Wars so much further than the first film, as in so many new things. Just like Williams has got so much more to play with, such wider tapestry go off in terms of like the quality of the story, depth of emotions, the filmmaking skills at hand, the story going on, all these different things. It just gets to open up so much further and delves so much deeper into his entire musical vocabulary. Fantastic type of things in that regard. Now with the Return of the Jedi, didn't have as much problems on that regard. Just source it from these 2-track tapes that have the original film mixes on them. Source some other things again from the polygram CDs, and just kind of did some re-equalization to have everything kind of meld together very nicely. Just has a very good, nice, lively, dynamic range. Sounds very organic. Just like it sounds, just sounds really damn good. Just sounds really damn good. But of course, there's a 4th disc, so they added a lot of things. Again, they have an alternate version of the main title theme. Should probably heard on maybe another release here and there or whatnot, but at the time there's like this 4th disc was such an amazing thing that they almost planned to have a 5th disc. They kind of like got just up to the point of maybe just mastering it, but they kind of scrapped it when they kind of like were looking forward to special editions and prequels, stuff like that, so they kind of scrapped doing a 5th one later on. But aside from just a couple of tracks, there was so much unreleased material in this whole thing, but they weren't able to source a film version of Lop T Neck, the entire thing from Jabba's Palace there. So they had to go back to the Polygram album version, which is the same thing that was released on the music video you could find on the Definitive Collection Laserdisc set. But they kind of an odd type of thing where it's like, okay, they'll have like the film version as one half of the track that they put on like the alternate mix in a certain way of the other half. Like Leia breaks the news, then moves into the funeral pyre for a friend where Luke's burning Vader's body and whatnot. On the Jedi thing, they use like the film version for one half and the alternate mix for the other half, but on the bonuses, they kind of like swap it around. So like one of them's the alternate version, one's the other film version. I don't know why they couldn't just put the entire film version complete track on one, then put the complete alternate version on the other one. It's kind of a weird mismatch type of thing that they did there. And also, they did this weird type of thing with the Return of the Jedi Ewok Celebration track, which closes out the entire film, segues into the film version of the end credits from The Empire Strikes Back. So it's a very weird type of thing. So it's like the one that's actually on Empire is not the film version. It's a slightly different version that's a little bit pitched differently. It's a little bit, tempo's a little different. But they put the actual film version tacked on to the end of the track from Jedi. It's very strange. It's very, as much as they want to be like, let's not make this the album version, let's make this much more towards like a chronological placement and everything in the sequencing of the tracks, and not kind of like have those same things from the polygram thing where they kind of meshing different cues together that didn't originally fit that way on the film, but they're still kind of doing that to a certain degree. Kind of weird, just weird, because that end credits track from Empire, it's actually one of my favorite, again, because Empire is so good, and it's kind of a medley of all the great tracks. I just go back to that track 100 damn times. But I just go back and listen to one that's actually on the Empire CD, because I like that opening, the music that's kind of opening up when they're on the medical frigate and they're kind of putting together Luke's new hand and all the type of stuff. They're talking with Lando on the Falcon. It's just a beautiful, beautiful track that segues all the way to the end of the film, just bursting with love. It's kind of a weird type of thing, how they kind of splice that stuff together. I don't know what the idea was doing that type of stuff. I don't know why they couldn't just fix it or something like that. Put all the film mixes together, and anything that's altered, put it together on the alternate fourth disc, and just have that kind of all together instead of kind of like twisting it up in weird ways. It's kind of an odd type of thing how they put all that together. But still, it's a very good thing. The dynamic range on this whole thing is very good. Very, very good. As I said with this entire guy from Malone Digital, Chris Malone, looks at this thing very well. Some things here and there might fall off in certain ways. They're not technically perfect. Even the entire thing where, again, that fourth disc version of the end credits of Empire, there's this weird sort of like odd spliced in the heps at 308. It's like this weird sort of like they spliced something and then the decibel level changed in a certain way. It was very weird. I was listening back to it. Kind of an odd type of thing. So, as like I said, they're a little bit on the crunch putting the whole thing together, like roughly about 1 week per disc to get everything mastered and all that type of stuff and put together in sequence, stuff like that. So they had kind of a short window because they kind of like had to sell it on Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox in kind of a quick way and whatnot, and kind of gather things from different countries. Some stuff was taken from Germany, some stuff was taken from here, there. And of course, wrangling around with Polygram, who wouldn't give them the mixes, so they had to kind of grab things from the CD and fuzz things around. Because I mean, Fox and Lucasfilm still owned the rights to the things; they could still use the music. They just wouldn't give them the album masters to be cooperative. So it was very, very much kind of a headache type of thing to kind of crunch in this whole entire set. Whatnot, but it's such a beautiful set. I love listening to this whole thing. It sounds absolutely fantastic. But it's the whole thing, like I said, there's supposed to be a fifth disc, but they kind of scrapped it when they're getting up to doing special editions, which have problems. They do have certain sonic problems to them. Now, they tried to go back this whole thing, and they ended up being as comprehensive as possible, laid everything out chronologically, of course, including some alternate takes and all the different things here and there. But a lot of the stuff comes down to how the things were mastered, how the dynamic range was applied, and all these different filterings they pull the whole thing. They kind of, some places cut out a lot of the frequency response. Or there's a lot of high ends that are cut out in the whole thing. Dynamic range is compressed or at least limited to a certain degree, so it doesn't sound quite as organic, doesn't sound quite as lively. I was listening to this one track on Return of the Jedi that Malone Digital and whatnot did details as a sonogram, the entire PDF they have. I'll have a link below for it. It's yeah, I could definitely hear it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The version on the special edition just sounds more crass. It just sounds more abrasive to a certain degree. It doesn't quite have as much space to it. It feels like it's just a little bit crunched down to a certain degree, and it doesn't quite have as much of the range to a certain degree. So I always felt like when I got the special editions, I got Star Wars and I got Empire Strikes Back. I got them originally, right when they came out in '97. And these beautiful holographic discs and whatnot, digipacks. It looks like a wonderful freaking package. Beautiful type of stuff. But I got Jedi much later on when they kind of downscaled things to a jewel case and much less dynamic artwork, but still the same pressing. It doesn't matter. The same stuff on the disc, but I just never found myself really enjoying listening to the stuff on Return of the Jedi. And whatever reason, I just never found it very pleasant to listen to. But once I got the Anthology set, I listen to it all the time. Listen to it as much as all the other stuff because it's just more sonically pleasing to listen to. Because the special editions did have a lot of things going on where, even though they finally got handle on Ken Wunbergs, and one of the guys who actually worked on the original recordings and the film mixes, stuff like that a little bit, got all his original paperwork from a 20th Century Fox archivist to kind of figure out what takes were used for different edits and all the different mixes and whatnot, so they can follow exactly from the source into the mixes exactly which ones were used, because there's some debate and whatnot, when people also kind of looking back towards the polygram ones, thought like the Anthology was using the wrong mixes some places. Probably that quite wasn't so, because you're kind of like not comparing the exact things back to the film mixes, kind of looking back to those LPs which were mostly remixed. But everything was kind of mainly starts from these 3-track 35mm magnetic tapes, because the 16-track master tapes were presumed missing at the time, but ended up being found in the estate of John Neal. The mixer actually put together the double LP mixes back in the day, but apparently they end up selling at an auction at a certain point in time, so it's not really known exactly where they are at this point in time. But New Hope ends up sounding a little bit more shrill in this whole thing. They kind of accentuate the higher end type of things, where the first film doesn't have as much low end as the later films do, so it's a little bit kind of an odd thing to kind of accentuate that more and kind of like trying to balance things out a little bit better. But apparently, like, Empire kind of starts from these 24-track backup rolls and use a lot of stuff from the 1993 set to kind of fill in the blanks to a certain degree in some places here, there, and everywhere. But probably that one has a lot more dynamic range. Kind of comes out the best of the three in this regard, because, like I said, Return of the Jedi ends up being filtered to a certain degree, and it doesn't sound quite as dynamic. It's a little kind of clunky in its sound in a certain degree. It's not as much of a pleasant experience listening to it from my experience. A lot of people kind of praised them at the time because they were much more complete, get everything in the right sequence, all the type of stuff. But when you're kind of comparing things back and forth and stuff like that, it really gets hampered to a certain degree. It's a lot more, like I said, processing on the whole thing that really just kind of doesn't make the best sonic experience. And of course you get the Sony Classics version that come out kind of reissued in, like, I don't think it was like 2006 or something like that, but apparently there was not much of a thing done. They kind of put it through like some sort of like Sony digital decoder type of thing, something, another pass through of some sort of processing regard or whatnot. Doesn't do much to improve everything, doesn't do much to hurt it in any regard. But all these types of things where they keep going back and around, the ones that are currently out as I'm recording this or whatnot, they kind of just went back and did another remix and remaster on like an exact sequence of the old LP releases. I don't know why you keep going back to that. It's like, why you keep going back to, like, let's just refashion the kind of truncated versions of the albums when you have complete freedom to just do a comprehensive remaster of the entire thing, get it sounding the absolute best it possibly could at this point in time. It's kind of weird how they keep handling these things. It keeps going from rights to rights to rights. It's that Sony that went back to Disney, and if you're going on like HE tracks, you can get like 2 different versions of the entire thing. The Sony Classics versions, now the more remastered versions that are going off from Disney. Haven't heard the best things from the Disney ones. I heard the one for Empire got really kind of bungled up. A lot of the low end gets really overly accentuated to a certain degree, and it's not the best mixes. Again, everything keeps going back to a remix and that type of things, because I don't know what the case is. Like I said, Empire's the tapes they're using on the Anthology set are falling the hell apart at the time. So they keep trying to just refashion things back to those LP releases, and it's just very weird. Why would you just keep catering back to that? Just like, why don't you just create the most comprehensive version that sounds sonically fantastic? Employ the best people you possibly can to just work on this stuff to make it the best experience possible. Because all this stuff sells regardless. But still, people kind of criticize things here and there. And then when I see all these discussions, kind of talking about these new releases that come out, and then maybe they're like higher resolution types of things here and there and everywhere. New vinyl pressings, all this type of stuff. They had Ultimate Digital Collection, Ultimate Vinyl Collection, all these different things. People can sing that 93 edition. That soundtrack Anthology still sounds really nice. It's got a good warm tone to it. They don't kind of make anything sound too shrill. Some things maybe not the best. Like I said, there's some technical flaws here and there. There's not perfect. But like in terms of like having just a very pleasant listening experience, just all this beautiful, gorgeous music that John Williams composed and just revolutionized everything, like I said. Just took it away from those nihilistic films of the 70s and a lot of like dreary types of things, and like it just creates cinema. They're just exciting, escapist, verbose, just rousing types of things. Just brought that entire sound back, circulated back into films. Everyone's just launching that up through the 80s and into the 90s and whatnot, just like capturing that sound, that feeling, whatnot. Just launched everything so very much. Just have it in the very best audio quality you possibly can get it. It's very important. Certain people have their own preferences, but I think like this set just doesn't get enough love. It gets a lot of love from people who know about it, but it doesn't get circulated enough in the conversation, of the wider conversation, and getting enough attention to it, because you'll never hear Lucasfilm talk about this thing. They'll always talk about the new thing coming out, the same thing they have or whatnot. It's been out for a couple of years or whatnot. This thing's never going to get reissued. It's not going to get the time of day or whatnot, but it's good quality. It's on high quality CDs. The packaging is fantastic. Even though mine's a little bit beat up, that booklet looks fantastic. All the type of stuff. I would like I said, that Lucas Kendall liner notes would be a lot better if they had a little bit more detail about just more music-centric type of things to try and tell you beat by beat what's happening in the story as this cue is going on. Don't quite need that. You need something a little bit more centric towards the crafting of the song, of the track and whatnot, and the musicality going on the whole thing. That'd be much more important to kind of read through and stuff like that. But you got a little 1977 text excerpt interview with John Williams and the whole thing, talking about what he did with the score, how he approached it, all that type of stuff. Just a very good set. Kind of the weird thing how they did that, the inserts on the actual CDs was like black text on this black background with only slight differentiation and whatnot. But again, McQuarrie artwork on the CDs, stuff like that, and just like everything's very well laid out. I think it's a very good sounding thing. It's like the thing I go back to. It's the thing I listen to. Don't listen quite as much to the special editions one. I still keep a couple tracks around because, like I said, the main title for the original Star Wars, want to have that, how it goes off as it is in the film. And a few other things here and there, just have a little bit of a comparison and fill in the blanks that are not on that anthology set to make it more complete to a certain degree, but I think it's a fantastic thing. It never goes for all that much money, maybe $20 or $30 at the most. You can still hunt it down if people are selling it. I think it's really well worthwhile. I don't think it should be overlooked. I think it's a very good set that if you love that music, you should definitely check it out and just see how warm and dynamic the sound is on the whole thing. Really nice. It's very nice, guys. So it's like, if you have that set, I have other sets, and really kind of want to comment on the sound quality of these different things, and if you just kind of prefer a different soundtrack release to a certain degree, or whatever the case is, let me know about it. If you have some of those HD high-resolution tracks from the different releases that are out, definitely let me know how those stack up to the other sonic qualities of these releases, of these masters and mixes, stuff like that. It's going around and around. But soundtrack preservation could not be at a higher end right now, with stuff like Entrada, La La Land Records, a couple of our outfits out there just doing a really fantastic job creating complete expanded scores and doing a lot of fantastic remastering jobs. Just the height of it, just the peak of it. So many great scores, just getting the time of day right now to make them sound absolutely magnificent. So guys, really like to hear your thoughts on this entire thing. And I am planning for the retro video series on here to cover the special edition Laserdisc and probably the DVD releases in very much detail. So guys, hope you enjoyed that and enjoy this. So guys, thanks much. Take care. Bye-bye.